In 1943, the open-hearth furnaces at Jones and Laughlin Steel in Pittsburgh were running at nearly 3,000 degrees, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The men who fed those furnaces worked 12-hour shifts in heat that could blister exposed skin from 10 feet away. But here's the part nobody talks about anymore. Those men didn't survive on protein shakes and pre-workout supplements. So what exactly were they eating that kept them standing? Number 10. Black coffee. Before a steelworker's boots ever hit the mill floor, he'd already downed 2 or 3 cups of coffee at the kitchen table, usually before dawn. In the 1940s, coffee was cheap. During the Depression, overproduction in South America had pushed prices down to as little as 8 cents a pound. And even with wartime rationing, coffee remained among the most accessible staples in a working household. It was percolated, thick and black. No cream, no sugar if you were drinking it on the job. Their wives brewed it strong enough to strip paint, poured it into a thermos, and tucked it inside the lunch pail alongside everything else. Inside the mill, coffee served a purpose beyond caffeine. When a man was working near molten steel in temperatures that regularly exceeded 120 degrees on the shop floor, dehydration was a constant threat. Water fountains existed, but they were often far from the furnace line. A thermos of black coffee, already warm, was always within reach. It kept men alert during the brutal back half of a 12-hour shift. And it was among the few small comforts available in an environment where the air tasted like sulfur and iron filings. Coffee was not a luxury for these men. It was closer to equipment. But coffee alone did not keep a man on his feet. What he ate alongside it mattered even more. Number 9. Potatoes. If one food defined the blue-collar table in the 1940s, it was the potato. In the years leading up to the war, the average American consumed over 200 pounds of potatoes per year. And in mill towns like Homestead, Pennsylvania, and Gary, Indiana, that number was likely higher. Potatoes showed up at breakfast fried in lard alongside eggs. They showed up at dinner mashed with real butter, or baked alongside a pot roast that had been simmering since morning. And they showed up in the lunch pail as cold potato salad or leftover potato pancakes wrapped in wax paper. For a steelworker burning through thousands of calories per shift, potatoes provided slow-release energy from complex carbohydrates. But they had another advantage that mattered just as much. They were dirt cheap. A family of 5 could eat potatoes every night of the week and barely dent the grocery budget. During rationing, potatoes were not stamped. You could buy as many as you wanted, which made them a godsend for families already stretching their meat and sugar allotments thin. In the coal country kitchens of western Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio, potatoes were boiled, roasted, scalloped, hashed, fried and mashed into every meal that would hold them. However, potatoes alone tell only part of the story. And when you paired those potatoes with what comes next on this countdown, you had a meal that could fuel a man through anything. Number 8. Creamed chipped beef on toast. If you've ever heard the term SOS from a veteran or an old-timer, this is the dish they're talking about. Creamed chipped beef on toast was one of the most common meals served in American military kitchens during World War II, and soldiers brought the recipe home with them. Thin slices of salted, dried beef were warmed in a thick white sauce made from flour, butter, and milk, then ladled over slices of plain white toast. It was filling, it was cheap, and it could be made in 10 minutes with pantry staples. For steelworker families, chipped beef was a weeknight lifesaver. The dried beef was shelf-stable, which mattered in homes where refrigeration was still unreliable. Icebox models were common, But electric refrigerators did not become standard in Milltown homes until after the war. A jar of dried chipped beef could sit in the pantry for weeks when a wife needed to get dinner on the table fast, especially if her husband was pulling a double shift and their oldest son had started working the night turn at the same mill. She could have plates ready in the time it took to boil water. In mill towns across Pennsylvania and Ohio, SOS was not a punchline. It was survival food that happened to taste good with enough pepper and a side of canned green beans. Number 7. Navy bean soup. However, not every meal in these households came together so quickly. Some of the best fuel took all day to prepare. In working-class kitchens from Pittsburgh to Youngstown to Bethlehem, a pot of navy bean soup simmering on the back burner was as common as a clock on the wall. The recipe was simple. Dried navy beans soaked overnight, then slow cooked for hours with a ham bone, an onion, a few stalks of celery, salt, and black pepper. The ham bone was never wasted. After Sunday's ham dinner, the bone went straight into the stock pot for Monday's soup. Nothing edible was thrown away. What made bean soup so valuable to a steelworker's household wasn't taste alone. A single cup of navy beans contains roughly 15 grams of protein and over 12 grams of fiber. For families where meat was rationed to about 2.5 pounds per adult per week, beans were the quiet workhorse of the protein column. A quart of bean soup in a thermos could carry a man through 6 hours of shoveling limestone and iron ore into a blast furnace. It was warm, dense, and filling in a way that a sandwich couldn't always match, especially during winter shifts when the walk from the parking lot to the furnace line crossed open ground in freezing wind. The soup was also cheap enough that even the lowest paid laborers, the men earning around 75 cents an hour in the early 1940s, could afford to eat it every day. But bean soup wasn't the only thing those victory gardens fed into. What went into the pot alongside those beans might surprise you. Leftover vegetables, a handful of carrots, sometimes a few potatoes diced small. If the family had a victory garden out back, whatever was ripe went in. The USDA estimated that roughly 20 million victory gardens were planted during the war in empty lots, city rooftops, and backyards across the country. In steel towns, these gardens weren't a hobby. They were a second supply line for households where the grocery budget didn't stretch far enough on stamps alone. Number 6. Eggies. In the 1940s, eggs were everywhere, not just on breakfast plates, but stirred into meatloaf, baked into bread, dropped into soups, and scrambled with whatever vegetables were on hand. Backyard chicken coops were not a lifestyle trend. They were standard infrastructure in steel town neighborhoods. Even in the row house communities that lined the hillsides above Pittsburgh's steel mills, families kept a few hens in the yard. When the weather got too hot for the garden, the hens kept laying. Eggs were protein you could count on. A single large egg contains about 6 grams of protein, all 9 essential amino acids, and heavy doses of vitamins A, D, and B12. For a millwife managing a household on ration stamps, eggs were versatile enough to anchor any meal. Breakfast was fried eggs with potatoes. Lunch might be a hard-boiled egg tucked into the pail. Dinner could be eggs scrambled with onions and peppers, or beaten into a casserole to stretch whatever meat was available. During the worst months of rationing, when meat stamps ran out before the end of the week, eggs filled the gap without apology. But here's what made them irreplaceable. They were also one of the few complete proteins available without a trip to the butcher. If you've been paying attention, you've probably noticed a pattern. These families weren't counting macros or reading nutrition labels. They were eating whole, unprocessed foods because that was all that existed. The entry coming up next might be the clearest example of how far modern eating has drifted from what kept those men on their feet. Number 5. Whole milk. In 1945, the average American drank nearly 45 gallons of whole milk per year. That's roughly a glass and a half every single day across the entire population, including children, women, and the elderly. For a grown man doing physical labor, consumption was almost certainly higher. Milk was not rationed during the war. While meat, butter, sugar, and canned goods all required stamps, milk remained freely available, and the government actively encouraged people to drink more of it. Propaganda posters called it the victory food. The USDA recommended 2 to 3 servings daily, and by the mid-1940s, Americans were listening. This wasn't the skim or 2% milk that lines modern grocery shelves. This was whole milk, full fat, often delivered to the doorstep in glass bottles by a local dairy. In Pittsburgh's mill neighborhoods, the milkman came before dawn, leaving bottles on the porch so they'd be cold by the time the family sat down for breakfast. A steelworker might drink a full glass with his morning eggs, pour some over oatmeal, and have another glass at dinner. His children drank it at school through federally subsidized programs that began expanding in the 1940s. The calcium, vitamin D, and protein in whole milk helped build the bone density and muscle mass that a lifetime of manual labor demanded. But the numbers tell only part of the story. Since 1945, whole milk consumption has collapsed. By 2001, Americans were drinking fewer than 8 gallons per person per year. The fat was stripped out, the delivery trucks disappeared, and an entire generation grew up thinking milk was something that came in a plastic jug with a low-fat label. Whether that trade was worth it depends on who you ask. But the men who poured steel at Bethlehem and Carnegie's Edgar Thomson Works weren't asking. They were drinking. But milk was only part of the fat story. The next entry on this countdown is a cooking ingredient that has almost completely vanished from American kitchens. Number 4. Lard. Before vegetable oil, before canola, before whatever seed oil is trending on social media this week, there was lard. Pure rendered pork fat. In the 1940s, American households consumed nearly 7 pounds of lard per person per year. It was the default cooking fat in working-class kitchens across the industrial Midwest and Northeast. Steelworkers' wives fried eggs in it. They made pie crusts with it. They used it to fry potatoes, to grease baking pans, and to make biscuits that held together in a lunch pail for 8 hours without crumbling. Lard wasn't considered unhealthy. That idea did not take hold until decades later, when government dietary guidelines began pushing polyunsaturated vegetable oils as a heart-healthy alternative. In the 1940s, lard was cheap, available, and calorie-dense, which was exactly what a family feeding a man who burned 5,000 or more calories a day needed. A tablespoon of lard contains about 115 calories, and it was folded into nearly everything that came out of a cast iron skillet. So, why did an entire country stop cooking with it? The short answer is that the vegetable oil industry spent decades lobbying for dietary guidelines that demonized animal fats. The longer answer is more complicated. Modern nutrition research has started to question whether the shift away from animal fats and toward processed seed oils was the right call in the first place. But in the row houses of Braddock and McKeesport and Clairton, nobody needed a study to tell them that a biscuit fried in lard stuck to your ribs in a way that nothing else could. If you are finding value in this kind of deep dive into how an older generation fueled the hardest work in America, hit subscribe. We break down stories like this every week. This next one, though, is the food that divided families. Kids dreaded it. Mothers swore by it. And steelworkers needed every ounce of what it provided. Number 3. Liver and onions. In the 1940s, liver and onions was a regular rotation on American dinner tables, and working-class families served it with something close to pride. Mothers and grandmothers sliced beef or calf liver, soaked it in milk to pull out the bitterness, then fried it in butter or lard until the edges crisped. Caramelized onions went on top. Mashed potatoes and stewed tomatoes rounded out the plate. You ate what was put in front of you, and liver was put in front of you because it was one of the most nutrient-dense foods available for the price. A single serving of beef liver contains more iron than almost any other food on earth, along with massive amounts of vitamin A, vitamin B12, copper, and folate. For a steelworker whose body was constantly depleted by heat, sweat, and physical strain, liver was closer to medicine than dinner. But it had another advantage the family budget appreciated. Organ meats sat at the bottom of the butcher's price list because they spoiled faster than cuts like chuck or brisket. Families who couldn't afford a roast every week could afford liver. During rationing, organ meats took fewer ration points to purchase than prime cuts, which made them even more attractive to households watching every stamp. Children famously hated it. The texture, the mineral tang, the way it looked on the plate. But their fathers cleaned their plates and went back to the mill the next morning with iron-rich blood and enough B vitamins to keep their nervous systems functioning through another 12-hour shift in front of a 3,000-degree furnace. Liver and onions wasn't a food people chose because they loved it. It was a food people chose because it worked. But even liver needed something to sit on. And what came next in this countdown was the foundation under every single meal. Number 2, bread and butter. In 1941, the United States government did something that quietly changed the health of every working family in America. The FDA mandated that all commercially sold white flour be enriched with iron, thiamine, riboflavin, and niacin. The decision was driven by military concerns. Draft boards were rejecting young men at alarming rates for deficiency-related conditions, and nutritional scientists linked the problem to a national diet too. Reliant on refined grains stripped of their natural vitamins, enrichment did not make white bread into a health food, but it turned the cheapest staple on the American table into a vehicle for essential nutrients that millions of people were not getting any other way. For steelworkers, bread was the backbone of the lunch pail. Ham sandwiches, meatloaf sandwiches, liverwurst on rye, peanut butter and jelly as a second option packed underneath the main sandwich. Bread went on the table at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Bread soaked up gravy, held together leftover pot roast, and stretched every meal further. And slathered with real butter, which averaged around 18 pounds per person per year in the 1940s. Bread delivered dense calories in a form that traveled well and never required heating. In ethnic neighborhoods where Polish, Slovak, Hungarian, and Italian immigrant families made up much of the mill workforce, bread took on local character. Dense rye loaves in Polish enclaves, crusty Italian rolls in neighborhoods along the Monongahela River, each one packed into a metal lunch pail and eaten cold alongside a thermos of soup or coffee on a break that lasted 20 minutes at most. Bread was not glamorous. It was not the food anybody remembers with longing. But without it, every other meal on this list falls apart. How do you pack a lunch pail without bread? How do you soak up gravy, stretch leftover pot roast, or send a man to work with something that will not spoil by noon? You do not. Bread made everything else possible. And that brings us to number 1, the single most important thing a 1940s steelworker consumed. Not a food exactly, more like a ritual. Number 1, the lunch pail itself. In the analog days of American industry, when 700,000 men walked through mill gates in Aliquippa, Baltimore, Bethlehem, Braddock, Buffalo, Chicago, Clairton, Cleveland, Gary, Homestead, McKeesport, and Pittsburgh, every one of them carried a metal lunch pail. The barn-shaped tin bucket with a clasp on top wasn't just a container. It was the difference between making it through a shift and collapsing. A man couldn't leave the shop floor to eat. His car, if he had one, sat in a parking lot 5 football fields from the furnace. No cafeteria, no vending machine, no chance to run out for a sandwich. When the 20-minute lunch break came, a steelworker cracked open his pail wherever he stood, peeled off 20 pounds of flame-retardant gear, and ate what his wife had packed the night before. A typical pail in the 1940s held a main sandwich, usually ham, roast beef, or meatloaf on thick cut bread. Below that, a hard-boiled egg or a piece of cold fried chicken, a small container of potato salad or coleslaw, a piece of fruit, usually an apple, a cookie or a slice of pie wrapped in wax paper, and a thermos of coffee or soup wedged in alongside everything else. The best cold cuts always went to Dad. Kids knew this. A wife packing her husband's pail understood that the food inside wasn't dinner. It was fuel for conditions that would put a modern office worker in the hospital inside an hour. But what made the pail more than a container was what it represented. The pail sat on the kitchen counter the night before, next to a scarred hard hat. For children growing up in those houses, the sight of those two objects side by side represented something wordless. The helmet was armor. The pail was ammunition. Together, they sent a man into a furnace and brought him home. In immigrant neighborhoods, the pail carried flavors from the old country. Kielbasa and rye bread in the Polish enclaves of Hamtramck and South Chicago. Italian cold cuts on crusty rolls in the neighborhoods above the Monongahela. Slovak stuffed cabbage wrapped in cloth. The food was different, but the purpose was identical. Keep the man standing. Get him through the shift. Bring him back. By 1945, Pennsylvania's mills had poured 95 million tons of steel into the war effort. The state alone produced as much steel as every Axis nation combined. That steel became ships, tanks, aircraft, and bridge girders. It built the infrastructure of the 20th century, and all of it came from men who ate potatoes fried in lard, drank 45 gallons of whole milk a year, and carried their fuel to work in a tin pail, packed by someone who wanted them to come home alive. Those pails are mostly gone now. Mills closed across the Rust Belt. Furnaces went cold. The men who carried them are in their 90s or already buried. But the food they ate tells a story that modern nutrition has mostly forgotten. It was whole. It was simple. It was cooked from scratch by someone who knew exactly how hard the work was going to be. And it kept men standing in 3,000-degree heat, 12-hour shifts at a time, in the most physically demanding industrial job ever created. We covered another story about the generation that built this country. Stay tuned for that one next.